Hi, I'm Danielle, and I'm so glad that you're here because together we're going to work through big stuff. Your body's keeping secrets from you. What do you think or feel when I say that? Your body keeps secrets from you, and it's not because your body wants to hide things from you. It's because you are hiding them. You've been taught to ignore and shove down and to repress lots of experiences, thoughts, and feelings that you haven't had either the time or the resources to handle, and you hide them, or your body hides them. But your body keeps the score. Have you heard that expression? And what it's talking about is the knot in your stomach when you say yes, but you actually want to say no. Your body remembers. Your body remembers the times where things played out a certain way, and you don't want to repeat that. The exhaustion that you can't explain. Yeah, that is your body screaming. The anxiety that shows up for no reason. And if you're listening, I just did air quotes, no reason. What is that about? Your body has reasons. We are just often so busy that we are not paying attention to our body. Because we've all heard the expression, your body keeps the score, and that is like a tally of trauma, tallying up the experiences in our lives that are painful for us. Our body keeps count of the pain. Bessel van der Kolk has a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it is fascinating and enlightening. In fact, I found this book to be really confronting. When I was listening to it, I was doing my breathwork certification course. I was driving to and from Sydney, so I had a couple of hours in the car each day to immerse myself in this book, which was part of the curriculum. It is a weighty book, no doubt about it. But the thing that I found very confronting about it is I began to view his theories through the lens of my own childhood and my own experiences, and also through the lens of myself as a parent and the experiences of my children, and understanding the moments in life that are frightening, that are challenging, that are that bring up the more difficult emotions in a child, and if they are not dealt with appropriately, they just get shoved away into little pockets inside your skin, and it comes out in other ways. And it's these other ways that we're going to be talking about today, right? Because Bessel van der Kolk is essentially right. Our bodies store what we don't heal, and then it manifests in physical ways. I actually read something a couple of days ago from a British somatic psychologist called Ailey Jolie, and she gave me a real aha moment, because I've got this framework of the body keeps the score, but she talks about women's bodies not just keeping the score. Women's bodies keep the story. So much of the nervous system research that has been done by the known researchers have been looking specifically at the nervous systems of men and animals, right? No surprises there. All of the big studies that have been done on men and animals, probably even menopause. That's a joke, by the way. We all know that there is very, very little research done into menopause, particularly if you compare it to the research that are done into erectile dysfunction. But we digress. The existence of us as women in this world is fraught with microtraumas from the moment that we are born. What does that mean? We are taught to view ourselves, our bodies, through the lens of others. We are taught for a lifetime to stay small, to be nice, not to be dramatic, to make ourselves easy to be around, easy to get along with, while we are constantly being assessed and judged and evaluated by the world, by our communities, and even by our families. This, in turn, will make us often dismiss our own fight and flight responses. So what does that mean? When we get the urge to leave or to fight back, we will sometimes stay in a situation that doesn't feel safe to us, right? Or we will bite our tongue rather than fight a point or even, fight back physically with our bodies. We override our own boundaries. And this then sort of helps or enforces this way of being, which is more disembodied, right? We become disconnected from our body, from the very vessel that nourishes us and tries to protect us and the thing that we live in and with, right? We suck our bellies in. I recently went to a pelvic floor specialist who told me about the dangers of holding our bellies in because of the pressure it creates inside our tummies that therefore creates a downward pressure on our pelvic floors. So we have been taught that holding our bellies in is good posture. It's great for our core. It looks better than a sloppy, sticky out belly or whatever, but it's actually bad for us physically. So where did this come from, right? So we suck it in, we truss ourselves up, we improve ourselves to be more appealing to the gaze of others. I'm not saying this is bad. I do it. But this is what we have been taught. This is how we've been taught to view ourselves. We stay in situations that we don't feel safe in. And I know I have. And we do that so that we don't make things worse, which is crazy. But this obviously isn't just women that I'm talking about. It is somewhat everyone, but definitely women live with microtraumas that men don't have to consider. And today's episode, we will be digging into that, not just with women though. We're going to be digging into the conversations from the last season that touched on the ways that the body keeps the score. I'm going to be sharing 3 stories. Actually, I think it's maybe 4, but we'll see what comes out. When bodies have refused to be ignored any longer, bodies that have betrayed, bodies that have changed, bodies that have demanded attention. And what happened when the people living in these bodies finally started to listen? My first guest today, Carolyn, I was delighted and excited to have her on. She was one of my very first guests, and she is one of my dearest friends. And Carolyn's story is interesting because her hair fell out and it forced her to redefine her identity. I'll also be talking about my own body keeping the score, my own body and brain that crashed throughout my perimenopause and ADHD diagnosis journey. And then there is Preston, whose body held decades of trauma until he learned to feel again. This isn't about fixing your body. This isn't about fixing your history. What we're doing today is really trying to hear what your body is trying to tell you that you may be not paying attention to. So Carolyn Erskosolo works in film and television. It's an industry obsessed with appearance. And about 7 years ago, when she was returning from maternity leave, her hair started falling out inexplicably in clumps. They were terrified at what might be causing this. There was a number of things, but Carolyn tells us what that experience was like for her.
So I still can really vividly remember when I was in a meeting with Channel 7, one of my favourite clients, and talking to them about one of our shows.
You're allowed to have favourites? Oh my goodness. Are you allowed to have favourites? You've just said that publicly. Sorry, yes, carry on. You were talking about a show.
And I noticed, when you notice strands of hair, your own hair falling down, normal, but this was quite a lot. And I thought, geez, that's a lot of hair sort of falling down around me in this meeting. But I didn't think anything of it. And then as time sort of went on, I continued to notice, the hair, and it became even more pronounced in the shower when it became clumps of hair coming out as well. So this was all very strange because, I'm not postpartum anymore, and I didn't know what was happening because I'd never heard of alopecia areata or universalis. I'd never heard of them. And so I had no idea. So, of course, off to the doctor I went and got lots of blood tests. Looking back on it now, it was pretty, I think, obvious what was happening to me, but they, still had to go through all of these tests. I can't remember what it was that started to make them think that potentially I had cancer. So off I went to have some other tests done, and then also sent off to see a dermatologist finally. And then strangely, when I was at the dermatologist, they had to take a little biopsy from the top of my head. And I had that done at the time. And then that finally came back, and that told us that I had this autoimmune condition called, at the time, they thought it was just alopecia areata. I mean, they weren't aware of my the extent of how bad it was actually going to get because it was still very early days. So, yeah, then I went away. There was nothing really. It was funny when you go to a dermatologist, they're more about this is what it is. And that's kind of it. Here are all the things you can look at getting done, which was there was some topical ointments that I could have, steroids it was that I was offered, steroids to either rub on it or needles or take a steroid as well. But I was always, and then there was other drugs as well that I could take, but I was always very conscious that I had the two little guys. I didn't want to take anything as well that would control my hormones, like steroids, things like that. And so I always kept just coming out with, I'm just going to see where this goes. And then in the space of a month, all of my hair really started to all fall out. I was trying to cover it up with scarves. I was putting it up in little buns. I was doing all of these other tricks to try and hide all the patches.
Yeah.
And
You were
eventually,
essentially doing the comb over, like you were trying to do a comb over, right?
Yeah.
Or cut the comb around. I remember it.
yeah,
I mean, what was it that you were scared of? Like with other people, particularly because you said you wondered if people would still want to, be around you and interact with you. Like, what were you afraid of?
I feel like because maybe I was just looking so different. And would someone want to be with someone that looks so different and weird, let's say,
Sure.
because that's how I felt. I felt like some kind of alien. And I laughed with my mum saying it feels like, I don't feel like this anymore, but it feels like I'm walking down the street with my bum hanging out. That's how I felt. So exposed. So yeah, making that decision to shave it off was huge. And yeah, we recorded it together. I got Sam to shave my hair off. Still find it very hard. It was so raw, the process of it. But yeah, once I'd done it and it was all off, I remember looking at myself in the mirror and thinking, well, actually, I really quite like this. Isn't this a funny turn of events to look at myself and go, actually, I quite like this. I know it's still going to be really hard to walk out that front door because it's really different. And I'm going to stand out. But I liked what I saw in the reflection. So that was a nice feeling. One of the biggest things I think a lot of people said, was that it was just hair. And I know it's just hair, but there's just so much wrapped up in your hair and it's part of your identity, and it's a part of you. And so I then started to have sympathy for people who lost anything, any kind of thing from their body without their choice. I'm sure it's a similar feeling, and I'm sure it's also very different to lose a limb or something like that. But it's not just hair. It's it is a part of you. Your identity. One of the other benefits of it has been the empathy and the space I have now for others that have a visible difference. I just hold so much more empathy for those that are out in the world, whether it be in a wheelchair, a prosthetic, or any kind of visible difference at all. And they're out there facing the world, and I know they're getting heads turned, including me turning and looking, and
Yeah.
not for any other reason other than being curious.
It's one thing to shave your head. It's one thing to be empowered and say, I want to have a skinhead. Or if you're losing your hair and you make that decision that you are going to take matters into your own hands and shave your head. Now, Carolyn's body changed without her having that sense of empowerment. Hair is often really deeply linked to not just identity, but femininity and an expression of your femininity. You know, I just even in the life of this fledgling podcast, I've had about 3 different haircuts. So it really is a form of self-expression and control. Suddenly that was gone for Carolyn. But she was able to go from, I feel like an alien, to actually, I quite like this. And she wasn't able to do that because she got over it. She got over the diagnosis, or she got over the fact that she is different. But she had to find a value beyond appearance. She had to find a place of peace about being different and standing out. And her body sort of forced her into a transformation that she never asked for. And when we're looking at these kinds of autoimmune diseases, they are often triggered by a stress situation. Now, Carolyn talked in her interview about the enormous amount of stress she felt about going back to work with 2 small children. And I remember the lead up to it, and she did feel very worried, a lot of guilt, a lot of stress. And would this have happened anyway? Who knows? Could a stressful deadline at work have brought it on? Who knows? We don't really know. But what we do know is that there are certain markers that happen in a body before certain things like this happen. So it's an interesting thing to note. I know that my mum was very, very stressed before her multiple sclerosis diagnosis. And this can happen in really big ways, this feeling of betrayal from the body, but it can also happen in smaller, seemingly less significant ways. I remember after the birth of my first child and my breasts, I was super proud of my breasts all my life. I was very proud of my boobs. They were great and perky and full and just a good handful. And they grew so enormously in the days after my first child being born. I could actually see the skin tearing. I could feel the skin tearing. I could see the skin tearing. I was getting these enormous stretch marks and my boobs hurt. And I remember crying in the shower thinking that, my boobs were ruined. I remember thinking that as they're ruined, I'm never going to have good boobs again. And even though boobs have a purpose, and they were doing that purpose, right? Feeding children. That's actually what they're for. They're not there just to, hold your clothes up and look good in a push-up bra. The purpose of them is, they were doing it very well. They were doing it so well, in fact, that they got enormous. And that sort of process just felt so out of control for me that I was really sad about it. And I think this also happens like with pregnancy, with postpartum, and with aging. Okay, we see it. I'm seeing it in my demographic and myself now is like the prevalence to try to slow aging down, try to take control of not just perimenopause and manage hormones, but, buying the creams to stop the wrinkling, right? And this is a thing. I feel like I'm doing my very best to stay on top of my health and my fitness and my vitality, but I see the signs of aging and I am working hard. Like I'm really trying to change the narrative in my head to not see it as a betrayal of my body. But again, when we talk about the body keeping the score, you can see like people who have a really stressful experience or a hard life, their appearance is, it shows in their appearance. So that is like a sort of physical way that the body keeps the score, but it is so much deeper than that. It is so much deeper than that. Our body gives us subtle signs when there is something going on. And often when we have been like trained to stop listening to our body and to just push on, just to keep moving forward, we stop listening to the signs. We stop asking our bodies what they need. So we get the pounding hearts and we get the sweaty palms. I actually walked into an event recently. I was walking with my good friend Carolyn Tate, who's actually also been on the show. And it was at the time that I was traveling just after my mum's death. I hadn't had time to process the experience, let alone to grieve. And I knew that I really needed to push it all down just to get through these two events. And as I was, I can walk into any event anytime and I feel cool, calm, collected. I feel confident. I feel ready. I cannot even tell you the last time I had a panic attack. But as I was walking up the staircase and I could hear the people talking, I could sense that there was this sort of anticipatory build for the next couple of days of this event. And I could feel my heart start pounding. I could feel my palms getting sweaty and my eyes started to prick with tears. And I could really feel that rising sense of panic. And I just had to stop for a moment. And my friend is like, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I think I'm going to have a panic." And I needed to really be with myself and breathe through that experience, which was absolutely my body keeping the score. I should not have been there, but I had to be. Okay, the circumstances it's just the way that it played out. But if I was really listening to my body, I would have been at home, wrapped up in a dressing gown, under a blanket with a cup of tea on the couch and just doing that for a couple of weeks to really allow myself to feel through the experience that I was having. But our bodies don't ask permission, right? Our bodies don't ask permission to express themselves. Firstly, our bodies change with time, but they also hold on to things that we would rather forget. And sometimes our bodies will then scream for attention, and you cannot ignore it. 3 years ago, I was lying in my bed, and I am someone who usually jumps out of bed full of beans in the morning, one of those annoying morning people. But 3 years ago, I started to not want to get out of bed. I was very reactive. I was very snappy with my family. I was very emotional, and I started to think maybe I was going crazy. I didn't want to show up on social media. I suddenly had this plummet in self-esteem, and I felt so bad in myself. But what came next was life-changing, because it led to a discovery of something that had gone under the radar for 47 years. But what started to happen was this feeling inside me like, I have nothing of value to share. Who am I anyway? Who would even care? So we will get to that in a moment. But back to me lying in bed, not wanting to get up, not wanting to be seen, not wanting to share, and also feeling very, very reactive. So super snappy with my family, super unable to cope. Usually, I'm one of those people that has a million balls in the air at all times. Another beautiful little quirk of ADHD. I have a lot of balls in the air, and I'm usually really proficient at juggling them all at once. Of course, there have been a lot of times in my life where that leads to significant burnout. However, it is something that I am good at, right? Multitasking. I have since discovered that the hormonal imbalances that come during perimenopause are often a trigger for ADHD, and for women of a certain age, suddenly realizing that something is amiss, or they feel like they're going absolutely loopy la. This is a very, very spicy combo and a tricky time of life for women who are in perimenopause, because the hormone changes create changes in your body, which makes the masking, which makes the strategies that you have created so that you can exist in this world, they all sort of start to fall away. What worked for you once stops working for you when these changes occur in your brain. Not for everyone, but just for a lot of people. However, what I will say is medication at this time in my life has been life-changing. I am more emotionally regulated than I have been in my entire adult life. And what that actually means and what that actually looks like is I don't feel that crazy roller coaster of highs and lows that I used to feel. I don't feel neurotic. That's something that my mother used to say, Danielle Colley, why are you so neurotic? Right? Well, now we know. I don't feel as emotionally out of whack. I used to be very, very moody, emotionally wobbly. I used to be very, very impacted by certain things that now I can take more in my stride. This doesn't mean that it has wiped away my humanness and I don't feel. It just means that I have a greater sort of control over my emotional landscape. I am not overwhelmed. I used to be overwhelmed all the time. Here's what I didn't realize until that crash. My body had actually been screaming for 47 years. That lying in bed and not wanting to get up, the, feeling reactive and emotional, my self-esteem plummeting, that, yes, was perimenopause, without a doubt. But perimenopause didn't create that problem. It stripped away my coping mechanisms that I had been using to hide these feelings. For 47 years, my ADHD brain had been desperately trying to produce enough dopamine to function, and my body had paid the price. I had lots of risky behavior in my 20s, which was my body seeking dopamine in any way that it could. I experienced multiple burnouts throughout my life. A lot of them have been written about in my book, The Chocolate Bar Life. And that was often my body begging me to stop. My brain runs at such a speed that my body gets completely overwhelmed. And when I didn't know that that was a thing, I just constantly thought that there was something wrong with me, that I, was somehow defective. lazy, but also, yeah, lazy because I felt like I should be doing so much more, but I actually was quite overwhelmed, paralyzed by that idea. My body was often begging me to stop, but I wouldn't. I kept moving. So even though I wasn't doing this great big thing that I felt like I should be doing with my life, I was constantly moving rather than resting. I would keep walking, keep cleaning, keep tidying, keep like just shuffling around, pottering around rather than sitting in stillness. And that anxiety that, I've tried to fix and heal and thought that I'd worked through so many times, that was my body just in constant overdrive, trying to compensate. And I would just keep pushing through. And I would keep self-medicating symptoms instead of addressing the root cause. I kept ignoring the signals. Now, in my defense, and perhaps even in defense of the health system that I was in, we didn't know about it. We didn't know about it in my 20s. Like, we weren't as aware of girls having ADHD in my 20s. It certainly wasn't something that I would ever have considered. And I can't see that having played out any differently to how it did. The timing of it is the timing of it. It happened when it needed to happen. And I don't lament the way that it's rolled out, but I do feel sad for that girl whose nervous system was constantly frayed and on edge. And I remember my mum saying things like, how did you get to be so neurotic? Why do you overthink everything? You're always like, why are you always on the go? You just can't sit still. So all of really, it's, there was a lot of red flags. I guess we could say there was a lot of red flags, but nobody put the pieces of the puzzle together. It has taken, even now, this time, a year and a half of regular meditation, watching my nutrition, really reducing and then cutting out booze and being medicated for me to finally feel like my nervous system is the least frazzled that it has ever been in my entire life. That means that I cry less, I'm less reactive. I feel like I want to run away from my life less. And it's not because I haven't been experiencing hard shit, because I absolutely have. I just feel like I am more regulated, which is an absolute gift. For me, it felt like perimenopause had said, enough. That's, you will listen to me now. And potentially if I had ignored that final warning, maybe I would be looking at some kind of immune system breakdown, an autoimmune issue, chronic illness, maybe even a neurological breakdown. Who knows? Because the body doesn't just keep the score. It doesn't just keep the tally. Eventually, the body comes to collect. My next guest had buried enormous childhood trauma for decades. Preston O'Brien's body kept the score of childhood sexual abuse and decades of shame until he learned to listen.
One of my most traumatic memories that really changed who I was is my brother. I had a teddy bear, Pinky, this guy.
Yeah.
See how he's got, see how he's got his ear cut off and his eyes pulled out and his stomach's been cut open. He's got lipstick rubbed all over him. Sorry, I'm making some noise. I had a teddy bear, Pinky, and I used to crochet clothes for him, and I fucking loved him. And Hunter took him off me one day because this is my memory of it, because he made me so happy, Pinky, and tortured him in front of me and said I wasn't allowed to love anything. And I wasn't definitely not allowed to love a teddy bear. And I got that tattoo because my therapist said there's some form that you need to reclaim, Pinky, because you are allowed to love and you are allowed to be kind, and that changed me. It was the more we talked about it, I realized what a huge part of my, I want to say growth, but damage that was. So
it's so remarkable, I think, that often there are these experiences that would not necessarily be marked down as trauma. You know, they're not
This
a
was
big T trauma, but there's these moments throughout our development that create these imprints of pain. And it really does shape us as we move forward and grow up, become adults. It really does shape us in some way, shape or form. A lot of people think that if they didn't have anything really obvious like abuse or like a major accident or a major big T trauma in their childhood, then the small things don't count. I mean, the ACE test, the adverse childhood experience test, the first time I did that, I was like, it's not that bad. I've only got a few. And then when I thought about it a little bit more and really allowed myself to think back on experiences that I had often diminished, thought it wasn't that bad, it only happened once, or things like that. It's really easy for us as adults to look back on the experiences of our childhood and diminish them because at the time they were probably diminished. An adult was just like, get on with it, put it away, stop crying, go to your room if you're going to, you know, or we didn't talk about it. So, yeah, wow. Pinky.
Pinky was, because Pinky only came up about a year ago. It was only maybe a year and a half ago, like 3 or 4 years into therapy. And Pinky was a huge part of the beginning of my dissociative disorder. And that's how I know that, because I can see Hunter holding him. I remember pouring milk on his stomach and trying to rub the lipstick off, because milk was white and his stomach was white. I was very young, trying to take this lipstick off and then trying to show an eye back onto him and stuff. So this is pretty horrible. I washed over in therapy things like I had cigarettes stubbed out of me. I was held against heaters and things as a kid growing up, all by my brother. And those things, you know, like you were saying, you normalize them, not just as an adult for a child, but as a child, you normalize them. You have to make them okay. And you're actually much better as a child at locking it away, at surviving, you know, and that's why as an adult, you have to deal with it. The memories I have are trauma memories, and you know they're trauma memories because I can tell you what the wallpaper looks like. I can tell you how the sheets smelt. I can smell fucking whiskey and I can smell tobacco, you know, and that I know the psychology behind that of my father feeding me alcohol to abuse me. So I know that because that's what, when I drink, something changes in me. Yeah. So I'm a great guy and always was when we were together, until I had 3 drinks. And then 1 drink turned to 3, turned to 5, turned to lines, and that's where the self-sabotage came in, because it was drunk and on drugs that I would try to find the next thing to blow me up because I hated myself so much. So all of my infidelity it was alcohol, drugs, infidelity, and then crime. So I'd go on the way home, I'd do crime or gambling. I'd throw all my money away.
I remember after going to a 10-day silent meditation retreat, I was like, I'm done with this trauma, unresolved trauma, because you were pretty much amputated from my life. And I was like, I'm done with this unresolved trauma. I'm going to contact you and say, I'm done. I'm putting it down. I forgive you. I'm okay. It's all good. Like I cut the ties. I cut the ties that bind us.
The memories I have are trauma memories, and you know they're trauma memories because I can tell you what the wallpaper looks like. I can tell you how the sheets smelt. I can smell fucking whiskey and I can smell tobacco, you know, and that I know the psychology behind that of my father feeding me alcohol to abuse me.
Isn't it fascinating that Preston's body remembered what his mind tried to forget? The abuse and addiction and decades of shame, it was all stored in his body. It was all waiting until he learned that healing wasn't about just stopping the behaviors or thinking differently. For him, healing was really learning to feel again, and not just feel his feelings in the moment, but to allow himself to feel the feelings of the hard things from his past and allow them the time and space to let his body to release it, like let his body release what it had been holding. But if we go back to like the concept that I touched on in the beginning about, women's bodies not just keeping the score and keeping the story, that Instagram post was talking about how the female nervous system isn't broken and it is really disembodied. And I think that, even in Preston's story, we see how that is. Like he was disembodied from his own experience. He knew that something had gone down and he was acting out in these behaviors, and yet he didn't have a conscious awareness of what it was. So the way that the body keeps the score often is like tallying these trauma moments. And in women's bodies, as we said, we're carrying like this lifetime of accumulated moments. And we ourselves, we're taught to judge. We're taught to judge ourselves and other women. And we stay small and we disassociate from our boundaries. We disassociate from our feelings. We dismiss our own fight and flight responses so that we're not seen as aggressive or dramatic. And we make ourselves easy to be around. That isn't an origin story of a trauma, right? That is an accumulation over a whole lifetime. How do we come back into communication with our bodies so that we can hear what it needs from us and when it needs it? Because Carolyn's body changed, her appearance changed, and it forced her to redefine her value beyond that thing, her external appearance, which had been a lifelong measuring stick for her. And then we look at my body and my brain demanding attention through like that hormonal change, through a crash that I couldn't ignore, because I had been ignoring all of these signs and symptoms for my whole life and not putting it together. And then there's Preston, whose body was holding on to all of this trauma, holding it really very much a secret until he was able to create the spaciousness in his life or quieten down all of the other things so that he could listen. So we've got three very different stories, again, very different stories. And we're coming back to one same core truth, which is that our bodies, they keep the score, but they tell the truth eventually. Like at some point, the secret isn't a secret any longer. So whether it's your body screaming out to you through an illness, through exhaustion, whether it is whispering to you through anxiety or insomnia or stomach pains that you just can't explain. And the question isn't how do I control this body? How do I make my body behave? How do I tame these feelings? The question is more about what is my body trying to tell me? And what is the story that my body has been keeping? Healing only comes through feeling, not thinking. That's why talk therapy can only get people so far, and then somatic therapies get people to, truly be able to heal. We need to be looking at completing unfinished stress cycles, not just talking about them. We need to be looking at healing, not just the big wounds, but also those millions of paper cuts that our lives and the world has given us through no fault of our own. Often it just is an assault. Life, being alive, is an assault. Our bodies keep a score of everything from the minute you started to breathe until now. Every experience, every emotion, every wound. your body doesn't forget, even if you are trying to. And your body is talking to you right now. That tension may be in your shoulders. I even noticed, as I said it, my shoulders are up here. And maybe even the exhaustion, you're waking up tired, right? Maybe there is anxiety or not living somewhere in your chest or your stomach. So this week, I want you to think a little bit about what is your body trying to tell you. When you sit quietly with no devices, with no distractions, and you listen to your body, what can you hear? What can you feel? What signals come up throughout the day, even when you are doing stuff? And if you were to ask, what do you need from me, body, feeling, emotion, experience? What do you need? Could you give it that? And I guarantee you that the sitting and listening to what is happening in your body is probably not going to be awesomely comfortable. And it might be so foreign to you that it's difficult at the beginning. But I wonder, when you get good at it, like learning a new language, right? It takes practice. When you get good at learning the language of your body, how will your life shift? I'll see you soon. I hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode of Big Stuff as much as I enjoyed recording it for you. Now, if you did enjoy this episode, it would really help me if you wanted to share it with just one person that you think is going to get something out of it. And also feel free to drop a comment. All of these things really help podcasts to gain more ears, and that's what we're really here for. Also, be sure to subscribe, then you will never miss an episode. If you want to find out more about me, who I am, what I do, then you can go and check me out at daniellecolley.com.au. I'll see you next episode for more Big Stuff.